All right. Well, hey, guess what, guys? It's that time. It is noon Central, 1 o'clock Eastern, and we're going to kick off the BIM broadcast today with Shane Scranton here in a moment. We're looking forward to having you guys interact with us. So by all means, please hit up that live chat while we're talking. If you've got questions, we can make up answers for you on the fly. That's kind of what we do. So don't be shy, right? That live chat is there for you. One bit of really important information, guys. I don't know if you know this, but Midwest University is coming up March 21st and 22nd. Autodesk University just ended. Midwest University is coming up soon here. I think we just closed speaker calls, and so we're getting ready to open up registration for you, the end users. By all means, get in there for the early bird registering. Make sure you get your spot in your classes that you find interesting. One note, our guest today, Shane, is actually one of the keynote speakers at Midwest U. So we're looking forward to hear what he has to say about technology and VR, and we might get a little kind of a pre-show here on today's discussion. So that's kind of the goal for today. And with that, let's actually jump into the discussion with Shane. So how are you today, Shane?
I'm great, Shawn. Thank you for having me on the show.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for showing up here with us. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, oh, by the way, I'm wearing my Midwest University shirt. Those of you who are speakers, I think this is still an offering we're doing this year. Hopefully it is, and you guys might be able to pick up one for yourself. So, yeah, sporting the Midwest U. And apparently my green screen behind me is actually picking up the green in the Midwest here. So if I sit up a little bit, you can actually see through my chest, apparently. There's that whole, don't wear green when you're green screening, but I forgot that was green. So whatever. I just noticed that, so I had to dip down a little bit. All right. So Shane, let's talk a little bit about you first and kind of how you got into this industry before we start talking about the world of virtual reality. So tell me a bit about how did you get into architecture, building the world of BIM in the first place?
Absolutely. So when I got to undergrad, I was planning on wildlife biology, actually, and I was working in fisheries. So clearly a direct overlap with architecture.
Yeah. Oh, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I was working over summers in different wildlife preservation roles. It was a really amazing job. But then I think halfway through, I got my first architecture studio under my belt and fell in love very quickly. And I was very lucky to that first studio I had. The professor was a visiting professor who owned a firm, and following that class, he gave me an offer to go work for him for a year. So I actually took some time off from school and sort of right out of my first studio was able to work with real clients at a firm, and really got the bug. I mean, my first day on the job, I was able to attend some client meetings and draft up some proposed changes to a residential building, and just
awesome.
Was instantly sucked into it.
That's fantastic.
And loved it. And then I went back to school and finished up my undergrad with architecture, and then I worked at a few more residential firms in Vermont. My school was in Vermont, and I was working up there with a couple different firms. And I don't know, it was a very nice architecture is really a good fit for me, just because of on the design side, I'm really focused on sort of obsessive detailing, and could really work long hours just fixating on certain elements of design.
Right.
And then just the collaborative aspects of it too with folks and firms I really love. So I got the bug really early.
Awesome. So then that was kind of your entrance into the world of architecture. What got you into building information modeling sort of in that front? Did the firms that you worked at use Revit at all, or were you guys using straight AutoCAD, or what was your history on that side?
Yeah, and I probably shouldn't say this name on the BIM broadcast, but my first software was SketchUp, and
that's all right.
and I got the bug really early with that too. And once sort of I learned SketchUp really well, I got into obviously more of the tools. I then went really more into the rendering side. So got my sort of 3ds Max under my belt, and some V-Ray, and then I actually spent most of my time in Blender using some open source tools. And then from there, I had a couple firms I was working with that were interested in actually fabrication and how to get more of their work automated. They were a home builder. And that's where we really started diving into Revit and the power of Revit. And that was sort of a crash course for me into how to use Revit. I also had a project in school that was requiring Revit, and I became sort of the BIM manager on that building project. And so
nice.
Both those were sort of learning by doing on a tight deadline, and that sort of forced Revit very quickly into my life. Um, and from there, once I sort of had that suite of tools under my belt, that was really how I ended up working at these different firms. Is at least in Vermont, there weren't many technically savvy people
Right.
in the architecture space, and so I found it very easy to get internships and get some clients who wanted technology in their firms, and I came in and helped them out with that whole ecosystem.
Nice. So while we are on the BIM broadcast, technically, a lot of your focus wasn't really the building modeling. It was more the building presentation and rendering, right?
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
that was like, it was interesting for me how I started very much on the design and viz side, and then the data side came later. And I think it's actually it's a pretty good metaphor for how we've seen technology in general in this space. Is people start really interested in the marketing and client interface side, and then like as the firms I was working with got more comfortable in 3D, they then started to want to use 3D to their advantage in their work, in their day-to-day workflow.
Yep.
But you know, the first touch point was like, we want our client to see a nice image,
Right.
and that was the start. And then once they had the models, they're like, well, what else can we do with these models? How can we better use it in our day-to-day process? And
Yep.
that's really when I started working on getting Revit into some of these companies.
Nice, nice. So let's break off of Revit here and let's talk about what you're doing right now. So you are an entrepreneur and you started more than one company at this point in your life. And right now you're the CEO of IrisVR, right?
Yes.
And so tell me, what is IrisVR? What do you guys do?
So IrisVR, we're a software company, and we're building a suite of tools for primarily the AEC industry to get their existing 3D models into VR and ultimately AR, and to be able to still use a lot of the native functionality of their core modeling workflows in a VR environment, primarily focusing on collaboration and the client presentation interface.
Nice, nice. So there are other people out in industry that are doing stuff with VR, with rendering, with taking models and presenting them out of tools like Revit. How do you kind of compare with companies like that? What's your place in this? Because there's a lot of different companies, and you guys all get lumped together into this AR,
Yes.
VR rendering world, but it's not all the same thing. You guys do something pretty special.
Yeah, well, I think I'm happy there's more people in it now. Like we're working on a lot of new technology, and it's actually not great to be out there alone because it doesn't necessarily validate the market.
Right.
And now that there's a lot of people sort of in the same ecosystem, it's actually great because it just means there's a lot more visibility in the technology, and it validates what we've been working on for 5 years. And in terms of where Iris is different is pretty much since the start, we've focused very heavily on the technology you put on your face, whether that's VR or AR, and it sort of built all of our interfaces and all of our data pipelines and all of the workflows around the in VR and in immersion experience.
Nice.
And that has made us make very different choices, I think, than a lot of other folks who are maybe starting with the full screen interface and then creating a sort of a VR component of it. It just makes us make different performance decisions, and it makes us make different interface decisions.
Right. Yeah, so your specialty really is in the headset hardware, that whole virtual immersion experience, as opposed to, like you'd said, the big screen, looking at renderings on a screen.
Exactly, and like we want to build the best interfaces for something that's a spatial medium, and in our minds that requires some very different decision making on the product side.
Right, exactly. So why would somebody want to pick virtual reality or augmented reality over a screen rendering? Like why if I'm Joe architect out there in industry, or I'm Joe mechanical engineer, or whatever my role is, why would I want to choose VR over just the screen presentation with other tools?
I'll give you two answers. I'll give you the short, easy one, and I'll give you my deeply philosophical one. So the short, easy one is it's spatially realistic, so it's a much easier way to understand the space.
Right.
And of course, that's great if you're talking to a client who's really struggling comprehending what's happening. It's great if you need to coordinate across a whole bunch of people, and it really improves the communication workflow between that cohort. And true to scale, we're essentially making the assumption that true to scale is just inherently better than not true to scale when you're dealing with a building. And then my more deeply philosophical answer is I think that so much of the construction and design process is about sort of the tactile experience when you're in a building, but so much of that happens prior to building and prior to seeing the finished process. And I think that VR really brings your early work closer to that end experience, and it really bridges the gap to something that's used to be sort of really highly metaphorical. You're looking at plans and you're trying to extrapolate space out of that. Now with VR, you're brought a lot closer to the end experience sooner.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really cool. And we're in the early days, but it's only going to get better.
Yeah, I think that, it's all too frequent where I see clients, the people commissioning a project, not understanding a space, looking at plans and going, oh yeah, I get it, but they don't get it. And that's a problem, because then when they actually occupy a space, they're disappointed with their experience, and that's not good. I mean, the whole goal is to give them the best possible experience and the best understanding when it's still cheap to make changes, right? Once you've built it, it's no longer inexpensive to make that change. So while VR is an investment, I mean, it's a wise investment because the client gets such a much better product.
And it's interesting because it's such a, I totally agree. It's such a core issue, I think, that like we see it sort of has this domino effect where if like the client's saying yes, but doesn't fully understand the ramifications of it, like you're going to see more change orders later, and like the meetings are going to start stacking up, and like we're trying to start building these case studies where we're talking to users is like, do you actually think that there's been a reduction in meetings as people are brought in and understand more of the project sooner? And like right now, it looks like the answer is yes, but I'm really hoping that we can start getting some metrics around that, because like if we can come out and say, look, if you use VR and through DD and CD phase, you're going to actually reduce the amount of coordination needed by this many hours in the next phase. Like that's a really tangible value prop that I think we struggle with in VR because it's so obviously good, but people need to start prescribing like real meaningful monetary value to it.
Right. Now, what about, let's exclude the client from this part of the discussion for a moment. Let's talk why VR within my firm, within my coordination meetings, within like in that aspect. Like, why would I want to use VR there to help understand spaces and coordination issues potentially? Is there a market for that?
Absolutely, and we're finding there's a really interesting QA/QC component to it, and it's sort of QA/QC in terms of model validation, where if you're looking at Revit, you're getting one experience, but when you go into the model and walk through, like, oh, like all the chairs are floating a foot off the floor, or like we need to fix that in the model,
right?
Or like, oh my God, what happened to that duct over there, and why is it 5 feet away from where it should be? And there's something about being able to walk through the model with a coordination team in a meeting and be able to pick out elements that you weren't able to catch in a screen-based version. So we're seeing that side, and also in terms of in-office use. There is, of course, also a direct design component where we have some users that will prototype something in one of their modeling tools, go into VR very quickly, look at it, take off the goggles, go back, prototype some more, go in and look at it. And it's this really cool iterative design process that's a little more true scale, and I think does actually help the actual design thinking process if there's some decisions to be made that are sort of very spatially difficult to figure out.
Yeah. So I know that your experience probably, at least given some of your earlier experience, is almost entirely in architecture. What about the mechanical structural spaces? Have you seen much traction there, and how are people using it for that? Is it sort of similar to architecture, or is it a different type of use case in that aspect?
Yeah, well, and you're totally right. When we started Iris, I was like, it's for design iteration and client presentation because that was my lens.
Right.
And then as we started rolling out our betas, like one of our first heavy pilot customers was Mortensen Construction. And like it just was like not, I mean, they were using it a little bit for design review, but not really. And then, we had other people step into the space that were more on the engineering side. And we very quickly saw that the market was, the whole AEC market was interested in this. And they did have different applications. At a base level, what I love about this industry is even though there's all these different vertical applications, they're all coming from a Revit model, or they're all coming from a Navisworks model, or they're all coming from a Rhino file. And it means that we can sort of build a base case that caters to all of these workflows by supporting the native sort of data from these source files. But now we're approaching a point where we can start building some sort of feature-specific tools on top of that data pipeline. And that's where we're really starting to focus on the business cases. So
Nice.
we sort of have design review working, but we are starting to roll out a lot more into the coordination and sort of QA QC space. We just did a tape measure tool. We're working on an inspect element tool where you're able to get more metadata in and flag those elements and create punch lists. That's sort of in the works and being improved upon. And then the one thing that I'm sure we'll talk about at some point is we're working on a lot more collaboration features too. That's been requested more on the coordination side, which is including like bringing people into the same space together in a multi-user environment and walking through the model together. So
yeah, we'll definitely be talking about that one in a moment here.
Yeah, I'm very excited for that one. And that's sort of it's but what's interesting about that is that's not really for design iteration because that's sort of a solo experience. But we saw all of these users that were like, we need to be in the model together and essentially go inspect the file in a true to scale environment. And building out tools for that has been really fun.
Excellent. So let's kind of change tack here a little bit. And we talked about, kind of why VR, but for the people who haven't had the opportunity to experience this yet, can you sort of try to describe to us what the experience of VR is? I mean, obviously on our side, on a flat screen, we're not going to see what that looks like, but can you tell us what that experience might be like for a first-time user and for somebody who's been using it for a while, beyond just how to use it, but what is that going to feel like?
Totally, and I'll say that my my caveat is no matter how I describe it, definitely go try it.
Yeah.
Because we do a lot. We when we started the company, I tried doing cold calls, like calling up a firm to get a demo in, and you sound a little crazy describing VR. Like you put the goggles on and you're in another world, and there's really no way to understand it besides just putting the goggles on and trying it for yourself. So that's my caveat, but I'll do my best. So essentially the goggles are showing a left eye and a right eye display, and those displays, you get essentially a slight offset of the image. And so as a result, you get a really true spatial image when you're looking into the goggles. And what they also all have is little sensors on them for head rotation. So as you look around, the image updates, and you essentially, if it's done right, you really do feel like you're looking around a true scaled environment that feels pretty accurate to real life. And then more recently, these headsets have also implemented ways to track you in real world space. So you can start walking around your physical environment and you'll also move around in the virtual environment.
Yeah.
And when you combine all these things together, you get this just tremendously immersive experience where if, for example, you look down when you're on a third floor of a building, you will feel that sense that you're looking down and are gonna plummet 30 feet when instead you're actually just standing in your office looking around.
Right.
And it's a very interesting leap that your brain is willing to make, and your brain wants to convince you that you're there.
Now I know in the past, a few years ago, there was a bit of a visual tear that might cause some people some discomfort, and I believe the new hardware kind of got rid of that. But the older technology, basically that tear kind of gave people a bit of nausea or vertigo. And especially those who are susceptible to, say, lots of rapid motion on screen, they might get a little ill. Has that been, for the most part, taken care of now with the new tech?
Yeah. So it's a hardware and software challenge. So I would definitely say the hardware is now good enough. It's
now good enough, not good enough, right?
It is now good enough.
Good. Okay.
My co-founder is very, very susceptible to motion sickness, so he's our guinea pig, and he could not use the early headsets. He just couldn't. It was instant nausea.
Right.
But now we've sort of reached that threshold where the frame rate's high enough and the latency is low enough that the headsets themselves are very comfortable. Now the challenge is on people like Iris, the software providers, to make sure that the experience is comfortable, because in software you can do things like hurdle a person through space on a roller coaster, and even if the VR headset is the best in the world, if it would make you sick in real life, it'll make you sick in VR. Right. Same with if you are flying 30 miles an hour up in the air, you're gonna feel weird because if that was happening in real life, it would feel weird.
Right.
So there's now an interface challenge on the software side to make sure that the interface is really intuitive and that the performance is high enough that it's comfortable.
Excellent, excellent. So let's talk a little bit before we get into the actual hardware, because we're going to get to that discussion as well, so people can have an understanding if they wanted to get into the space of VR, what kind of hardware they're going to need for this. But let's start first by talking about what you're seeing as trends across industry, right? You've been marketing IrisVR and the technology and the virtual experience and all that for a while. As you visit these different firms, what are you seeing as a progression for them? I mean, my experience a lot walking into firms is I still see a lot of plastic cutout models or chipboard models, or 3D printed models now is an interesting thing. Some of them doing just flat renderings, printing them out as high-res pictures. So what are you seeing that people are doing right now as they're making this transition across into VR?
Yeah, we talk about this a lot as it is drivers to our business. I think that it's not worth underestimating how much the 3D transition is still happening. I think that we are still finding that firms are still discovering the value of 3D in general, and then of BIM on top of that. And that adoption curve is still underway.
Yep.
And I think what we've seen is VR has been a really good forcing function to get firms to start doing 3D and BIM right. Because if you just draw a detail layer on top of a Revit model, like it's not geometry, it's not going to load in VR.
Exactly.
And it's funny how many conversations where we have where it's like we'll load a file from a firm and it very quickly turns into nothing about VR. It turns into their 3D modeling practices and their BIM collaboration practices. And it does not feel like the industry has reached a point yet where that is done. We are deep into that transition, and as a result, we do still, people will send us AutoCAD files, 2D line drawings, and say, how do we get this into VR? And it's sort of like, well, have you heard of Revit? Have you heard of it's, and as a result, it really makes us like, we bucket these customers now when we talk to folks is like, are they, what percentage of their work is VRable? What percentage of their work is in 3D?
Right.
And the industry is still deep into that.
That's awesome. Okay, so those of you out there who are taking a look at getting into VR, understand that virtual reality only works when you model stuff as close to accurately as possible, and start to transition away from all the 2D line work world. If you want something to show up in a virtual reality environment, it must be a 3D element, at least in some form. I mean, if you're just talking, cuboid spatial sort of allocation, you still need to have solid cubes, not just rectangles on a sheet. So, start.
You bring up a good point, Sean. Though actually, that's a really important thing. Is I think when people get very intimidated by VR because it's like, oh, we need to model the doorknobs, we need to model the window latches, and a massing model is still valuable in VR. A cube becomes a spatial cube in VR.
Yep.
A 20-foot by 20-foot cube suddenly has meaning in VR because you can understand what 20 feet is.
Right.
And we just tell people don't worry about the doorknobs, but we need polygons. We need 3D polygons. Right. Mass it out and get it in there, and that will help the conversation.
Yep. And then, I mean, that kind of goes to other discussions we've had in past shows where we're talking about level of development, right? The old term is level of detail. And actually in this conversation, it really is level of detail. How much detail do you add? And it doesn't have to be that detailed to take up space and to give an idea of what that object is. A shelf doesn't have to have every flute, every fillet, every piece of trim work put on it. It can just be a box with some voids cut out of it, and you're good enough to kind of take up that space and to communicate the intent, to get the idea before you have to go flush everything out. I remember way back in the day, I was working with a client who was he was frustrated because Revit itself was taking them such a long time to finish a project. And I was talking with one of the drafters. I'm like, so what's taking so long, right? You're doing a residential kitchen. Why is this taking so long? And he's like, well, I'm having troubles because I can't get the lettering on the whirlpool portion of the refrigerator right. I'm like, dude, this is a floor plan, man. You don't need lettering on a refrigerator for floor plan, right? And in VR, it's the same thing. It doesn't have to be the exact materialization. It's just you're trying, if you're depending on your design intent, right? Like if you're trying to do a full-on rendering world experience, that's different. But if your goal is to take up the space and communicate with a client about what sight lines are, cubes are good enough.
Yeah, and it's a very similar trend to what when I was in the visualization world, I saw sort of this curve happen with firms where there was sort of a long hype cycle around photoreal rendering, which of course still has value at a certain stage in the project, but clients coming in the SD phase wanting photoreal, And what would happen is we'd go into the design meeting and, they'd be like, oh, that cobblestone path, I want a different stone. And
Right.
it's like, we're literally figuring out if you like put the hospital here or here. And like, they're talking about the entourage.
Yep.
And I think VR it's very easy to fall into that as well, because
Yep.
the more detail you put in, you are opening up different conversations, and you have to be aware that that detail will be noticed. And it can be beneficial to go more schematic,
Yeah.
and work on those LODs appropriately. It depends on the stage of the project.
It absolutely does. Absolutely does. So let's actually talk a bit about the hardware now. Let's kind of transition off of what to model and what that experience is like. Let's transition more into the hardware discussion. So there's all kinds of different headset type hardware, but let's kind of step before that. What about computer hardware that needs to drive this? And then we'll kind of talk about, I got some screens that I'll pull up over here about different pieces of hardware, but what about the computers? Like, what do you need to drive a headset? Now, you were talking about, you were saying earlier in the pre-show, you're taking one for the team with lower grade graphics card tech, which is probably still far beyond what I've got on this computer that I'm using here, but what's
Yep.
needed?
Yeah, well, your computer probably doesn't have a graphics card, or has a very limited one, because up until recently, I mean, most processes could happen on the CPU. And VR, I mean, there's a lot of variables, but if you have to remember one, it's frame rate. It's the number of times frames are drawn on the screen every second, and most of these headsets run at 90 frames per second. And that's a lot. That's a lot of frames. Most monitors are 30 frames a second, or 60. And so just at that level, that requires a specific graphics card to run at that frame rate. And so pretty much when I'm looking at computers, I'm looking at a lot of factors, but the one that rules them all is GPU, and what power the GPU is.
Yeah.
And not surprisingly, because VR is gaming technology, right now, the best cards in terms of bang for your buck are gaming technology grade cards that can drive really high frame rate.
Absolutely. So what about the actual hardware now? I'm going to transition our screens here a little bit so people can see my my desktop a bit. And we're going to talk about something that's sort of new tech. You and I talked a little bit pre-show about what's new in the world of technology. And since we're talking VR today, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about the Microsoft side. You were saying that Microsoft basically has sort of a mixed reality headset store of sorts from a number of different manufacturers.
Yes, and I can, give the live showcase here. Windows MR. It's really funny. So I think to make it the clearest for the watchers and the listeners is Windows has been working for quite some time on the HoloLens, which is an augmented reality headset. And then through that technology, they were able to develop some VR headsets. And unfortunately for the industry, they named them MR, or mixed reality. And so mixed reality sort of means both virtual reality and augmented reality, depending what headset you're talking about.
Right.
So the headsets you brought up there, they are all virtual reality headsets that happen to be called mixed reality. But for everyone's purposes, it is virtual reality. You can't see through them. It is fully immersive, and they're really, really amazing pieces of technology. The reason they're amazing is they have on the front here, I think that comes through. They have these sensors, and these sensors are essentially trackers that allow to track your position in space. And they also track these guys, which are motion controllers. And what that means is the entire experience is self-contained, so you don't need any external tracking to be able to accurately track your body in space.
So the old tech for this, just to kind of be clear, would there be something like a presentation room that you might set up, and it would involve having like cameras on poles and sensors on poles that were around you to kind of track where you are. Now these headsets are all, like you said, entirely self-contained, so that whole hardware setup space limitation is gone, and you can effectively use a conference room easily.
And it gets better. The only things you need to plug in are one HDMI and one USB.
Nice.
And the reason it even gets better than that is because it's in the Windows ecosystem. Anyone who's running Windows 10 and has run updates recently the drivers are already installed on all Windows machines. So if you have a decent machine with Windows 10 running, if you come and plug these headsets in, they'll just work right out of the box. There's
Nice.
no setup needed. And that's huge because a lot of our customers, they struggle installing any other gaming drivers on their machines, either with firewall issues or with driver issues. And this bypasses all of that. And the reason we personally are very excited about this as a company is we know that there's a day coming where people will have VR at their personal workstations. They'll have it at their own desks. And this gets us a lot closer to allowing VR to really be a personal device and not just a device shared by the whole office.
Well, and with these price points, that already is becoming much more of a reality with these price points. We're looking at what, maximum $500 for a set that is, like you said, self-contained, plug and play. I don't have to involve my IT necessarily to get these to work. I can pick one up, plug it in, and start experiencing some of this virtual reality environment. That's pretty cool.
And you can look at the manufacturers. I mean, our hope, we don't know this for sure, but our hope is that, as firms buy new workstation desktops, this stuff will just come packaged,
Right.
It's at that tier now where, like, I hope a firm buys 300 computers and they get 300 headsets with them. I mean, we've been building our technology for a long time to cater to that.
Right.
And it seems like we're getting ever closer to that reality. And I can't wait for that.
Nice. Well, now let's transition off of the Microsoft side here. Let's talk about IrisVR a little bit, your two products that you guys have, and then we'll kind of continue the hardware discussion right after that. So I've got your virtual reality page pulled up here. If people want to go to your website, it's irisvr.com. They can start seeing some of this exact same stuff here. But we've got basically the two main public products, which is Prospect and Scope, up on screen. And Prospect is sort of the desktop side PC hardware with some of those Microsoft plug and play type devices as well as a few others. And then Scope is the mobile solution, right?
Yes.
Am I missing anything, or are those the two main ones that we want to talk about?
Those are the two main ones.
All right.
And they're, they sort of represent the state the industry's in right now, where headsets running on a computer can really handle quite a lot of geometry and can handle a lot of computational complexity.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of our primary product is Prospect, and we built that to really leverage all the power inside a PC that's built for VR. And that's the one where you can navigate around a 3D file. We support Revit and Rhino and SketchUp natively, and you can navigate through those files and interact with them in different ways.
Nice.
Scope, on the other side, is for viewing essentially panorama images that are rendered. So that can come out of something like V-Ray, that can kind of come out of something like Lumion or Enscape. There's a whole bunch of them that produce these panorama formats. And then our technology essentially reads those images, makes them into a sort of VR panorama experience, and then downloads it to your phone that you can put into a mobile device. So that's like a Cardboard or a Gear VR or a Google Daydream.
Right. Now I'm going to actually throw you a curve question a little later on in the show as we talk more about the mobile side devices, but let's kind of focus on a few of the ones that you talk about in the Prospect side first. So you're talking HTC Vive and Oculus Rift. Those are two that weren't, if I recall correctly, in that Microsoft sort of store environment. But so we'll kind of pull up the Vive here, and this is one that I know you've shown a lot on at your booth during different events. You have the Vive kind of right there and ready to go. Why do you have Vive as sort of one of your main devices?
Yeah, so with Prospect, we've always been trying to make it as agnostic as possible on hardware that we deem is good enough.
Right.
And the Vive and the Oculus right now are the two headsets that are really leading the pack. The reason we talked about the Windows ecosystem at the beginning is it's another headset that we think is going to be really fantastic, and it's coming up very soon. So
Right.
I'm just sort of building the hype around that as well.
Yep.
But specifically on the Vive side, the Vive is, if you have time to set up external trackers and put them into a space where you can walk around, the value the Vive has is it calibrates with the floor, so your head height is exactly accurate, and that's really nice for any architectural experiences, right?
Yeah.
Because if you have someone who's 5'4" and someone who's 6'4", they're both going to get an accurate spatial experience inside the Vive. That's really, I think, probably the most immersive of them all. So highly recommend them if you have the space for setting them up.
Excellent. Now, what about the Rift, which is another one of the hardware devices? This is actually one of the probably the most popular by name. People recognize this device because Oculus Rift is one of the forerunners in the hardware side. Um, they've come a long way. Like this is a brand new device. It looks really clean. They've got some new controllers. So talk about this one for a little bit.
Yeah, and well, I will. In terms of the Vive and Rift, it's actually split pretty much 50-50 in terms of
Nice.
our user base, and also in terms of AAC when we do surveys. It's really funny when we send out surveys, well, no matter the number of headsets we list, it usually comes out exactly split between all of them. There's like not a winner yet in this
Nice.
space. And it's because they all have different value.
Sure.
The Oculus Rift is better for a seated experience. So if you're sitting at your computer or sitting at a demo machine and facing forward, it's a nice experience. It fits more on a desktop. You can move around, you can set up a third sensor and sort of have more of a room scale experience. But out of the box, it works a little bit better as a seated sort of forward-facing experience. With that said, I would say the ergonomics are better. The headset's comfier. The
Nice.
controllers make a little more sense, and it's just a little better designed on the ergonomic side.
Nice. So, oh, by the way, guys, I don't remember if I mentioned this as the show kicked off. If you've got questions and you want to interact with us, we are watching that live chat stream. So if you've got a YouTube account, you're logged in, feel free to jump into chat, ask questions about this as well. If you want to ask something of Shane or myself on this topic, by all means, make this an interactive show for yourself. So let's jump back over to your page for a second here, and let's start talking about the mobile experience just a touch. So there's three devices here, the Daydream, the Cardboard, and the Gear VR. And the Gear VR, I think, is the one that I actually had some questions about for you on this, because I noticed you're talking just 360 panorams. And so Daydream, actually, no, Daydream might be the one as well, because this has sort of a controller aspect to it that may allow a little bit of moving around. This looks like a very interesting, comfy headset that can fit pretty much any phone device. The Cardboard itself is a relatively inexpensive variation of that, right? Google Cardboard's been around for a while. They have some different form factors for different size phones. And then there's this Gear VR device. And this one, as I was looking into it, I was super interested. If you guys want to know more about this one, go to Samsung's page, take a look at their little video. This controller here really has me curious. There's games you can play with this. You can move around in space using this little thumb controller deal. It's almost like a micro version of the Sony Vive or the Oculus Rift. So are you guys going to be in the near future kind of incorporating this so that it goes beyond just the 360 panorama and kind of going more into a walk around in sort of a mobile environment, a planned walk around?
Yeah. So yes. Before we go there, though, I should have given this caveat at the beginning that there are a lot of headsets right now, and unfortunately, each one does have its nuances.
Right.
And on the mobile side, it's just especially frustrating. Well, yeah, I'll call it frustrating. And it's because like even you brought up the Gear VR, the older generations don't have the controllers, and a different generation works with a different phone, and the Daydream only works with Google Pixel, but Google Pixel 2 just came out. So what does that do with Daydream? And the Cardboard, you have to calibrate depending on the phone you're using. And there's just like each headset has its caveats.
Right.
And so I think for the sake of this talk, we can get into some of the details, but I think the shorter version is if you have an iPhone, you're probably going to be using Google Cardboard. And if you have an Android device, you should sort of Google your phone name and put VR on it and see what results come up. Right. Because there are some native mobile solutions, but it really depends on the phone you have.
Yeah.
So that's the high level sort of how to handle mobile. And then to your question, Shawn, about when you could have a navigable 3D mobile experience, we're back to frame rate. It comes down to what those poor little phones can handle in terms of geometry. And right now, it's around 100,000 to 300,000 polygons. And that's, as you know, in the BIM world, that's just not that much.
Right.
So we're doing a lot of work into how we can sort of bend to the will of these phones and still have a navigable experience. And so we are absolutely interested in that. And there are more headsets coming out in the future that phones are getting more powerful, mobile technology is getting more powerful. That threshold will go up, and there will be a point where it really makes a lot of sense for us to build on that.
Nice.
A technology to track is called Oculus Go. that's another mobile headset coming out soon that will create more confusion. But essentially, it doesn't require a mobile phone, but it is a mobile standalone device, so it has the same performance requirements.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a device you could preload some stuff on, ship the device to somebody, or bring it to a meeting and not have to set up computers, not have to set up anything else. It's just you can view the 3D panorama in a space.
Well, and that's what's exciting too. Just the last point, that's mobile is going this direction where right now you need to put your smartphone into these holsters to get them to work. But it looks like the next generation is really going to not require your own smartphone. They're going to have their own displays and their own processing,
Nice.
and they're going to be pretty cheap, so that you could essentially buy a couple for the office, not require anyone to put their personal smartphone into it, and still have a nice sort of wireless mobile experience that works with panoramas. So that's coming in 2018, and we're pretty excited for that workflow.
Excellent. Excellent. So let's go a little bit more on the AR side. We've been talking VR almost exclusively until now, and we had a little discussion earlier about what the difference is between virtual reality versus augmented reality versus the new term out there of mixed reality, which to me still seems to be just augmented reality, but whatever. Microsoft has a cool new product, or a coolish product, that's sort of still in beta, which is the HoloLens. This thing to me is probably one of the most exciting pieces of tech. I experienced this one at Midwest University last year, and I think we'll be doing it again this year in our showrooms. If you guys are going to Midwest U, you might be able to experience this and some other tech for yourself. But this one, you see through the lenses. There's a fairly low resolution kind of screen that gets projected out in front of you that you can kind of see things in space. This one's really cool. So
yes.
I see you have a prop there in your hands.
I do. I figure, if we're going to talk about VR and AR, it's good to bring the props.
Absolutely. So you guys aren't doing a lot with this right now, not publicly with this right now, because it's not a true publicly accessible piece of tech. It's more sort of developer-based, sort of beta-based, right?
Yeah. So I guess I'll give some context for the headsets, because it requires some explanation in terms of where we see this fitting in. Is what's cool about these guys is because they're AR, you can see actually when I hold it up like this that you can see through the glasses. It's got a display that is transparent. So at a basic level, you're able to see the world around you and also see things augmented into it. And the reason this is better than, say, an iPad doing the same thing is we're back to the spatial value. Is right. You get a left eye and a right eye, and you get a sense of depth. And I think there are many use cases that will be great on like an iPad that you hold up and you can see through and you get some functionality. So we're really doing a lot of research right now on like what is specifically the business case for having a sense of depth that's overlaid on your reality in a AEC BIM process. And we have a lot of theories around that, but we really want to hammer that down before we ramp up development on it. And I'm mentioning this on your show because we are really interested to talk to anyone who's done prototypes on the HoloLens and has strong opinions about what they would like to see made easier there and where they think there's real value. And we're really building that out right now. In terms of the technology, it's interesting because it's very hard to imagine a world where this doesn't merge with VR. Because sort of the weird thing is like once AR is good enough, you could just like block out the front of it and then you'd have VR.
Right.
So like once AR is really, really good at showing your whole field of view, you could literally cover up the front and then you'd have a VR experience. And so we do see over time, like these headsets are going to merge with VR and sort of become one thing. And we're sort of in the early growth stages. So it's not the case yet, but we'll get there.
Nice. And I know that there's another company out there. These guys were actually at Autodesk University. I stopped by their booth really quickly, but this is one that's been around for almost as long as the HoloLens, which is the Daiquiri product. And if you guys go take a look at some of what they're doing, this is going to really bring it close to home for you for the AEC world. How they're leveraging this from sort of a construction aspect / building management type aspect is really pretty powerful. I don't know if I can find it really quickly here on their page. Let's just see if they have something. Yeah, there's some things here like just navigating a space in a warehouse where the headset that you're wearing will actually indicate when you're looking for something where exactly it is in sort of a rack environment, or as in this case, as a medical example. Let me go back up here. Yeah, when you're working on, say, parts, in this case, a jet engine, it's identifying parts sort of on the fly and talking about what the issues might be and how to fix it. So, I mean, in the world of construction, what if you had X-ray vision, right? What if you had an as-built model, and that as-built model was accurate because maybe you laser scanned the space and it was remodeled to be correct, and now you're Joe maintenance guy walking through the facility, and you're like, where in the world can I, put a hole in a wall where I'm not going to drill through some electrical wiring or conduit or pipes or something like that, or where can I get access to this element that's behind a wall? And you can see through the walls with X-ray with this. That's augmented reality for AEC kind of on steroids. Like, that's where I see cool stuff like this going.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things about AR as well, from an industry perspective, and it comes back to something I said earlier, is AR, you no longer need to load a full model to get a good experience. It's much more like pieces based, where like if you want to look at, if you're building a reception desk and you want to figure out how it's assembled in the space, like you can just bring in that part of the model and have a very compelling meeting. And I think that that's going to be really nice for this industry, because this industry doesn't really build complete finished models all the time.
Right.
And AR is going to be much better at catering to that. Like if you have one element that you just want to look at, like that'll be great. And I think it'll make it much more accessible to people very early on, because they can just select what they want to view and just look at that part.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think with the AR space, it's going to be like tons and tons of use cases, construction sites showing tomorrow's construction, showing how far behind I am on today's construction, or how far ahead
Yep.
maybe I am, right? Like there's all kinds of different use cases there.
Phasing. I mean, phasing is going to be amazing. Is you could
Yeah.
like stand you're standing in a space that's still going to be fit out, and you want to see how everything's going to be moved in and how things are going to be installed. I mean, you could see that in real time and see that sequencing, and that would just be so powerful.
Yeah, timeline planning is it's gonna be a game changer in timeline planning when you can experience that first person with the spatial, relationships around you, and that's gonna be awesome. So,
And be able to walk around it. I think that's another
yeah,
big thing I didn't really mention, is like it's spatial, but it also tracks your movement.
right.
So like if you're standing, I don't know, in an office that's under construction, if you walk up to a wall, the digital model will move too, so you can really explore the proposed plan.
Absolutely. So now let's talk about another piece of hardware that kind of backs this up, and I want to kind of get your take on it. I'm not trying to have you slam anybody here in case you don't like it, because I have had some people who didn't like this hardware, naysayers of sorts. But what about this HP backpack that they have? Like, I was looking at the Mars Project team. They've got some pretty cool things, and one of the things that were showing up at the HP booth at Autodesk University, and also on the main stage of Built Conference, was that backpack. Have you guys taken much of a look at that and how that might affect and change like what you're doing with the AR side and possibly even the VR side?
Yeah, we have. We actually had one at our booth at Autodesk University.
Nice.
It's cool. I mean, what's amazing is they figured out a way to power a powerful laptop with two batteries, and I mean, it's that's hard to do. It's this really cool form factor, and then these batteries plug into it, and then it runs like a normal machine. The entire tech world in general is really trying to figure out how to do wireless displays.
Right.
And so the second you have a backpack on your back that's wireless, you do have to figure out how to send that signal to a TV if you want to see what someone's looking at.
Right.
And that technology isn't HP's. I mean, they're using different technologies to solve for that. And I think that right now still it has a ways to be developed. But the backpack form factor and the battery components it's pretty impressive that like they're able to get that functioning as a high performance computer without it burning through the battery in 5 minutes. I mean, that's hard to do, and they did a really nice job with that. So we're interested in it. I think that it's going to be interesting to see how that plays with AR as AR forms in the environment as well. So.
Absolutely. So let's kind of transition our frames. We're going to go away from the internet a little bit here and start talking. So when you're talking with the firm about augmented reality, virtual reality, that whole reality environment, what's some of the first conversations you have with them when you're starting to help them get into this space, when you're trying to help them plan for an implementation of sorts of a new technology and a new presentation method?
A lot of time, it sort of depends at what level we're coming in at the firm. Most reliably, we usually find our sort of internal BIM evangelist, who's really excited about VR or AR in some capacity based on their previous experience, and are really willing to be the folks that when we're not there, to be the point person on how to set up VR and how to get it running.
They can help
And I think
champion
that
that
that's
whole effort. Yeah.
exactly, and it's very important in the early days because we will show up, we'll help people, we'll guide them through, but like there's still a level of understanding that we really like to find someone internally to have, so that they can guide people through the experience. And usually at most firms there are a handful of people that fit that criteria,
Right.
and we actively seek them out and really love working with them because then there's just so much excitement internally that can build. And we have seen that it's a great way for also clients to feel more comfortable and oriented with it because we might be able to sit in on one client meeting, but we can't sit in on all of them.
Right.
So if we have someone internally who can sort of show how that works and really guide them through the VR experience, then there can be sort of more meaningful conversations happening. If we're talking about at the more executive and partner level, a lot of times we talk about the value of being able to win projects. I mean, there is a very meaningful value in using VR and AR in the actual submittal process. And then also the efficiency gains that can come from catching errors
Live
more
design.
in planning,
Yeah.
and being able to coordinate more effectively with your teams. So we stay more at the high level business value prop. But
Yep.
also in those meetings, we usually ask who in the office is the best at BIM and at 3D, and then we go seek them out and try to get them set up with a headset
Nice.
because usually the partner's like, oh god, like I'm not gonna touch the 3D side,
Right.
and we try to seek out the folks that know that well.
Have to get that internal evangelist kind of on your side, on your team.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. So let's kind of transition to another topic here. What's the most exciting thing you see coming in the world of BIM slash presentation slash whatever on the AEC side? What's the thing that when you wake up in the morning and you're like, hey, this thing is exciting me like crazy. I can't wait for this to come out, or is already out and I can't wait to get my hands on it.
At a higher level, I'm really excited about what gaming technology means for this world. With like Stingray, well, now it's called Autodesk Live, Revit Live, 3ds Max Interactive, sort of all the tech coming out of Autodesk on that in that realm. Unity, Unreal Engine. There's all these tools that are focused on real-time game engines, and I think we're just getting started there. I think that the industry is really seeing the light with the value of that,
Yeah.
and I think that BIM will become more gamified, and there will be someone who starts thinking about like what is creating BIM like in a game engine.
Yep.
And I think that's going to start to be thrown around, and I can't wait because you essentially get right out of the box real-time interactivity. You get physical interactions, you get physics, you get simulation, sort of all tied into it, and you get AI logic structures, which could be really interesting in BIM. And so I can't wait for more people to look at how BIM can be overlaid onto a game engine in a more creation-oriented aspect.
You know what? I want my virtual hammer and my virtual crowbar. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, let's put down a wall family from Revit using a hammer in VR. Like, why
right?
not? It'd be so cool. And like, I mean, that's a silly example, but I think like also just like the game engine, like, why not have our BIM models loading, instantaneously over all these large data sets because of how they've been processed in a game engine. Like, there are real meaningful computational ramifications that could really improve performance and loading speeds and processing speeds. And the industry needs that because we keep seeing files that are gigabytes and gigabytes, and like, the computer can only handle so much in its current framework. So gaming could really help change that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to move to one of the closing segments of our show here. This is one where we give whoever our guest is, in today's case, Shane Scranton from IrisVR, we're going to give him a 2-minute soapbox to talk about whatever topic is on his mind, something that he's passionate about, potentially something that annoys him to no end, whatever the topic might be. I don't know what it is. I don't want to know what it is until he starts. I want to be as surprised as the rest of you are. So Shane, 2 minutes on the clock. Your 2-minute soapbox is starting now. What's up?
This is related to the conversation we've been having, but I think it's worth going this route too in terms of gaming. thinking a lot about, and what I've been thinking a lot about on my free time is all this technology we're talking about. We're talking about it in the business sense, but like I remember when I was 12 and how addicted I got to electronics and the gaming world. And I've been thinking a lot about like what all this technology means for kids that are being born right now.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm conflicted about it. I can't imagine growing up in a virtual world. And like there will be parents that buy their kids an Oculus Rift and leave them in it for hours. And like I think there's some real stuff there that is going to need to be regulated and going to need to be talked about. And I find it very interesting because it's the whole spectrum. It's a computing platform, so there's going to be tremendous learning opportunities and tremendous development opportunities. But there's also like, do you want a 5-year-old playing Grand Theft Auto in an immersive environment?
Right.
No. And so it's the whole spectrum. It's like all the value you get out of it, but then also like kids pulling all-nighters playing shooters in a VR headset is just terrifying. And I think we've seen historically our policy and legal and legal regulation of this is usually 10 years behind the technology itself. And I think we're positioning ourselves to be really caught off guard by how to regulate this in terms of child development. And it's crazy because it's happening so quickly.
Right.
So that's my 2-minute soapbox.
Well, I mean, let's kind of continue on that topic for a second. Let's just take a look at how the mobile phone platform has changed human interaction, and especially that of children, right? Like I have young people near me, 2, 3, 4 years old, that are spending hours on YouTube on an iPad. They know how to run the tech, which, it's simple enough for a child to run. That's awesome. But when you hand them something like a book and they don't understand turning of pages because they're tapping, that video came out, right? Scrolling on a magazine, right? Like that video came out, I don't know, 2, 3 years ago. That's changed human interaction and how we relate to other people and social expectations. And I can't imagine what the VR is going to do to this. VR and AR. I mean, it's so vastly different. Like, imagine meeting a person. Let's talk just adult style or college age things. Let's talk speed dating with a VR headset on or an AR headset.
Exactly.
Right? All of a sudden, you're pulling up every stat, every Facebook post about this person sitting across the table from you, and you're meeting them. Interviews in a business world. Like, this is craziness. How far-reaching this could potentially be.
Well, and that's why it's like it's not good or bad. It's sort of all of the above, because it's going to be amazing to like if I want to learn about, I don't know, if I'm in a history class, like let's go on a VR field trip to that point in time. Like, there's going to be so many cool things you can do with it. But it's the whole bag. It's not one piece, and it's really going to be interesting to see how that affects children.
Absolutely.
That's why I stick with BIM. I'll stick with 3D models. It's so much easier. There's no moral ramifications of it.
3D models don't tell you no in a really bad, annoying voice.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, Shane, I really appreciate you visiting with us today. It's been a wonderful discussion. I look forward to seeing where this VR, AR stuff is going to go in the future. Those of you on the live stream, thank you for joining us as well. We look forward to seeing you in our next show in about 2 weeks. And one thing I didn't mention earlier on was that during Autodesk University, on our previous show, we talked about doing a live stream from there. And you know what, guys? The internet in that conference area is such garbage that it just wasn't possible to do a live stream. We tried. It wasn't possible. It kept crashing. So if you did catch a bit of our live stream when we were trying, it probably was garbage. We took it offline. It didn't work. And then there was no time to do recordings and to master those. So we did miss a week, but we're looking forward to staying on schedule even through the holidays as best we can with guests talking about topics that interest you. So if there's any guests that you feel we should have on the show, leave us comments in the comment section or in the chat feed, and we'd love to bring them on. We've got a list of people that we have to source from, but if there's anybody you want to hear from on this show, let us know about it. We're all about making sure you get guests that are interesting to you. All right. Thank you all, and have a fantastic day. We look forward to the next stream.